Hi, this is Joe Chambers. Welcome to Musicians Hall of Fame Backstage, the Vault Series. Today's guest is LA session musician and producer Louie Shelton. This is part one of a two-part interview we did with Louie. Louie's played on so many hit records from the Monkees, Seals and Crofts, Lionel Richie, it just goes on and on. If you do enjoy it, please hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our new content. And for those of you who can afford to help, we now have a Patreon account. Again, hope you enjoy it. Louie Shelton.
That was 40 years ago. I can't play that fast now.
I did not know. For some reason, I was thinking that was Tommy Tedesco all the time.
I know. So many people, I've heard people say they thought it was Jimmy Bryant, and so others thought it was Glenn Campbell, and so, because nobody knew who it was, because my name wasn't on the album.
Your name wasn't on the album?
No, we didn't get album credit on that one, on any of the Monkees stuff. It's only now that our names are out there on the internet for people to find out who played on what.
That's so cool. This is great. That's wicked. Well, speaking of Monkees, how about Last Train to Park?
Oh, I don't remember that. That one did I see. Oh, whoops. What do we got here?
So, how did that come about?
We were in a rehearsal for the first Monkees session with the producers, Boyce and Hart, and they gave us a verbal description of what kind of song they needed for the first single for the Monkees, and somehow that idea just came to my head. So I said, "What about this?" And they said, "Yeah, that's great. Let's work around that." So we sat there and sort of created that whole song, including the instrumental and the breaks and all of that. And that was in a rehearsal hall. Then we went to, a couple of days later, we went into RCA Studios and recorded it, along with Hey Hey We're the Monkees and Not Your Stepping Stone and a few of those others. Yeah, that's the way that happened.
So that was not, that wasn't a pre-made up riff or something that you had? You just...
No, I had never played that riff before. It actually came into my mind as soon as they said what they were looking for. It just came into my head. And it's so memorable. You know, you hear the first two notes of that and you know what song's coming up.
One of the great things about Last Train to Clarksville, of course, is that intro lick. And we worked the way we had been. We'd go into and rehearse the band first in a rehearsal studio, and we'd work out the whole arrangement and get the licks and so on before we went in the studio to save time.
And who played the guitar riff?
Louie Shelton. And so we were in that rehearsal studio. We said, we need a Daydream Believer kind of a lick for this intro. And Louie just said, how about this one? And he played dun 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 dun. Just had, I guess he'd worked it up before. I mean, he just had it in his head. And he just played it that fast, and it blew everybody away, and probably it was one of the major reasons they selected it as the first single. Just such an infectious guitar riff.
Day after day, 2, 3, 4 sessions a day.
Yeah.
Different artists.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what you're going to hear till you come in there and hear the demo tape.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then at that moment, that's when you come up with what you played most of the time, or just sometimes you create it during a job another night and then save it, or?
No, most, I would say pretty much all of the sessions, you're hearing the song for the first time. You haven't had any warning of what kind of song you're going to record. And the finger's pointed at you, and you have to come up with the goods right on the spot pretty much. But it was always a comfortable situation with people, you know, the artists and all, whether it was Glenn Campbell or Neil Diamond or the Monkees, you know, it was always a collective, you know, thing of let's figure this out and work it out the best we can, you know, you and the rest of the musicians. But with someone like myself, we were supposed to be able to deliver the right solo or the right riff or that kind of stuff. It was never written out for us. The reason we got called is they figured we could come up with something that would work on their record for them. We could come up with a guitar lick that would be a signature for that song, or solo, or whatever. Yeah.
Did musicians get royalties for these riffs that they came up with in any shape, form, or fashion, other than their standard scale for or whatever they charge per session?
Mm-hmm. Well, back when we were doing most of the recordings that I was a player on, the purpose of that session was for a phonograph record. And the union was good enough to build in this thing that said, now later, if it's used for anything else other than a phonograph record, meaning like a commercial or played in a movie or any other medium like that, all the musicians get paid again. So, you know, 30, 40 years later, I'm still getting checks for I Want You Back, I'll Be There, the Partridge Family hits, the Monkees hits, because they use those a lot for in films and commercials, so they get a lot of reuse and we get paid for that. But we never did get any kind of writers royalty on them because we weren't the writers, we were just the musicians. We were paid whatever it was for the 3-hour session, and then until it was used for something else, that's all we ever made on it, was that session fee. Oh, if it sold 10 million copies or if it sold 10 copies, we still only made our $250 for the 3-hour session, whatever the scale was back then. That's all we ever saw. But it adds up over the course of a week, you know. So back in those days, that was a good salary. It was better than I made playing 6 nights a week in clubs for years. So I was happy to get that.
You know, a lot of guys that you know have told me that they worked 3 to 4 sessions a day here in Nashville or L.A. or New York,
Yeah.
Motown, whatever.
Yeah.
Was that the case for you? Did you work? How many sessions did you work? And on average, at that time, how many songs would you, like on a Monkee session or something?
Yeah.
How many songs would you get, or tracks would you get done per session?
Well, a session being a 3-hour segment of time, we were expected to come out of that 3 hours with 3 tracks, at least 3 basic tracks, and it was usually all we were going for was basic tracks, and then later they would do the string and horn overdubs, and then obviously the vocals and mixing. So we would do that 3-hour session, say from 10 to 1. Then we'd run across town and do another session from 2 to 5. And then we'd head some other place, you know, for a 7 o'clock session. And that was at least 5 days a week. I tried to not work on the weekend. Some guys even worked on the weekend, but being a family guy, I tried to keep the weekends free. And so, yeah, it was 3 sessions a day, pretty much every day when we were really in the heyday of the session thing.
So, like you said, then in the mid-'60s, if you're working 3 sessions a day, you're pulling in $750 or maybe $1,000 a day. That was a lot of money.
It was a lot of money. I mean, for someone like myself, like I said, I mean, I was played in clubs, you know, from the time I was 14 years old until I got into the session thing. Well, I did 2 years in Las Vegas, and that was pretty good money. But still, it wasn't near what we made once we got into the studios. But you know, it wasn't really just the money. It was being able to go in and make records with musicians, like the greatest musicians in the world. And it's an experience that few people would ever have, sitting right in the middle of an orchestra where you've got the world's greatest drummer, the world's best bass player, a string section, and you know, a Frank Sinatra or someone doing a vocal, and you're sitting right in the middle of it. It's better than any stereo that you could ever listen to because it's right in the room with you. But it was the thrill of being in that environment, plus getting paid really well for it. And it was something that I prepared for, you know, all of those hours sitting at home learning all the different styles of guitar, you know. I wanted to be ready if they wanted blues, I had that. If they wanted jazz, if they wanted country, if they wanted rock, whatever they wanted, I could, you know, I could do it. I knew how to pull the sound and what to play. And so they were always happy with my work. You know.
Replication live for the bands that were following up what you did.
Yeah.
And when was the first time you heard yourself on the radio? And was that a momentous occasion or?
Well, let's see. The very first record that I heard myself on the radio was Last Train to Clarksville. And it seemed like they've started coming pretty rapidly after that because everybody wanted me to play on their records after that. Then we went straight over, started doing the Jackson 5, and then, you know, Neil Diamond and everybody. So the only time I'd get a chance to listen to the radio was driving between sessions. But after a while, anytime I turned the radio on, I would hear something that I had played on. And even to this day, I can't walk into the supermarket without hearing Summer Breeze or Last Train to Clarksville or Jackson 5 or some of that stuff, you know, because those songs, you know, they were classic hits and people still like that stuff, you know.
What's that feel like today compared to in 1966 or whatever?
I probably enjoy it more today. I didn't get a chance to appreciate it back then. There was so much stuff going on. I was so busy. At the time, I didn't have credit for it, so nobody even knew that I played on most of that stuff. But now, every time anyone hears something like that and they're with me, they say, "Oh, that's you. You know, I hear you on the radio." Yeah, that's. So it's probably better now than it was back there.
I think it was Tommy Tedesco that said, you know, I don't know if it was, I think he may have been speaking about Gary Lewis and the Playboys or something. It's one of those bands.
Yeah.
And they said to him, you know, I don't know what to do. The guitar player in the band said, who didn't play on the record, said, you know, when I'm out, people come up to me and say, "Boy, I love that guitar riff you did." And I'm like, you know, and Tommy said, "Just tell them thanks." You know? But they couldn't even come close to playing it live, you know. So
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that was probably a well-known situation, perhaps with the Monkees, but
Yeah, we had one day rehearsal with them to kind of show each member what we played on the record, and they were musicians. They just were not at the session level and probably wouldn't have come up with those licks, but they could copy it. And you know, in a live situation, because they were such a big phenomenon and so popular on TV, the visual thing and all that, their shows carried them through. no one was ever really questioning who was playing what or anything like that. But that's, I would probably have to say the same thing. Just, you know, you don't have to say, oh, that wasn't me, that was Louie Shelton. Just say thanks for the compliment, and you know, I would be happy with that.
Did you ever play on any of the association's records?
I knew those guys very well, and we toured with them. I don't remember if I actually played on their records or not.
The guys that I talked to that did said that was one of the bands that was adamant about not saying that they played on their records. They did not want
anyone to
know it wasn't them playing.
Well, yeah. I couldn't really speak to that because I don't recall actually.
Yeah, that's just one of those.
I knew those guys personally outside the studio. You know, like I say, we traveled together. When I was traveling a bit with Voice and Heart, played some of these, you know, group shows where they'd have the association, the Buckingham's, Voice and Heart, Paul Revere and the Raiders, all these different bands back in that time. So
speaking of that, I've got Drake. Did you know Drake?
Sorry?
Did you know Drake Levin?
Actually, Mark Lindsay was pretty much the only one I knew, and he's the only one that I actually was in the studio with. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know Drake personally.
He was one of the very first. I mean, that was in the. He actually played the riffs on some of the early hits, you know?
Yeah.
But I've got his guitars and stuff.
Okay.
Now I just didn't know if you knew it.
No, I didn't know him. Where did they record? Any idea? Because I recorded with Mark out in L.A. at Sony, or CBS, or Columbia, I think it was called back then.
I don't know where they. A Gold Star maybe.
Possibly, yeah. Down on Santa Monica.
But that was with Terry Melcher.
Yeah, right.
And so I'm not sure exactly what studio he used.
Yeah.
For the gearheads, what was your instruments during those?
Well, for the most part, I had a Telecaster, Fender Telecaster that I played on. I Want You Back and Last Train to Clarksville, and a Strat for Lionel Richie's Hello, and some of the other records. And well, actually, this is the Strat that I played on Hello, right here, that we're leaving with the museum here for anyone that wants to come by and have a look. And started out, when I first started doing sessions, I was using a Fender Super Reverb for the Last Train to Clarksville. And then all of a sudden we scaled down and went to the Fender Princeton, because on most of the sessions, because there were open mics with strings and all that, we couldn't really crank very loud in the studio. So the little Fender Princeton became like the amp of choice for everyone for quite a while there doing sessions.
Princeton or Princeton Reverb?
A Princeton Reverb, I guess it's called. It's the little...
They had both.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's probably the Princeton Reverb. Yeah.
When I was in 8th grade, I went and bought a used Princeton Reverb, and I didn't know, and they sold it to me at the music store. It didn't have a reverb unit. And so I get home, and this guy that was kind of helping me out, teaching me how to play, said, "Joe, you got a Princeton Reverb with no reverb." You know?
Yeah.
So they had to take it back. That's why I'm positive.
Well,
they had a Princeton, and then they had a Princeton Reverb.
See, mine didn't have a reverb either, because I had it worked on, and I turned the reverb into a master volume, because I wanted to overdrive the preamp at a lower volume, and the only way we could do that was to do that modification where you could crank it, the preamp, but turn the master down. That's like if you're doing a session with open mics and strings, you can still get some grunt, and but without it leaking in everybody's microphone. Yeah. So yeah, I had mine modified. I took the reverb off and used that knob for master.
Well, I did that too with a Marshall.
Uh-huh.
And It blew the amp up.
Oh, really?
I was playing and just
You know-
a big white puff of smoke came out.
I still have mine. It's still in my studio. Yeah, I have a rack of amp heads, and the little Princeton's right down there where I can just reach down and plug into it if I want to. Yeah, it still works after all these years. Still use it.
You kind of touched on this already, but did you have formal lessons? Did you have a teacher, or was it in your family, or did you just do it on your own by ear, or what?
Well, my family loved music, but there were no musicians in my family. And from as far back as I can remember, I used to, even as a 3-year-old, imitate playing the guitar with a broom or whatever, like a lot of other guys have done. And my older sister, who was a big fan of all kinds of music, because, you know, back then, and we're talking about the late 40s, early 50s, well, through the 50s, there was such a range of music that was popular, and we would listen to the old country guys back then in the Grand Ole Opry, like Ernest Tubb, Roy Acuff, and all those guys. But we'd also listen to Benny Goodman and Artie Shaw and those kind of people during the day on pop radio. And so my older sister saw that I had a real love for guitar, and she bought me my first guitar when I was 9 years old. It was a $13 Stella. And so I had 2 of those that I went through. Then I went through a Harmony, an F-hole archtop, acoustic. Then we went up to I think it was a Supro. It was an electric archtop F-hole guitar. And the strings were a 1/4 of an inch off the neck. And I'm still just 12 years old. And then finally, I went with this band, Shelby Cooper and the Dixie Mountaineers, when I was 12 years old. And they took me down to the music store and got me a Fender Telecaster. That was in 1953, and it was probably a no-caster. It was probably a 51 or 52 Telecaster. And I wish I still had it. But it was like going from a crop duster to a stealth fighter. It was so sleek, and oh man, you know. Of course, back then I was a big fan of Jimmy Bryant, and that's what he was playing, you know, with his single note, really fast stuff. And I was still a big fan of Chet Atkins, and I played that stuff on there too. You could play anything on it. Wes Montgomery, you know, anything. It's such a versatile guitar. It's been my favorite guitar, and it's the guitar of choice today. When I still play live, I play my Telecaster because it's so versatile.
Now, that wasn't the original one you used on the sessions?
No, that one somehow walked out of my house, and I don't know what happened. I don't know if I loaned it to someone or what, but I just realized one day the guitar wasn't sitting in the corner at the last place where I had seen it. It was gone, and I haven't seen it since. That was the one I played on Last Train to Clarksville. So now the one I have, I put EMGs on it, and it's just a real versatile guitar.
The no-caster was the Last Train to Clarksville guitar?
No, the no-caster, I got rid of that in 1958. When I went to a Gibson ES350T after I saw Chuck Berry. Traded in the no-caster for the Gibson. And it was a beautiful guitar. It was the blonde guitar with the gold plating, and, you know, it looked like $1 million. So, no, the one I played on Last Train to Clarksville was probably a 65. I got that in the middle 60s. And that was the one that I played on I Want You Back and ABC, all the Monkees stuff. And then I also acquired a 335 and a Birdlander, a Gibson Birdlander. And I sort of, at that point, started to collect guitars. Well, not as a collector, but I kept adding to it instead of trading in, you know, and all like that. So Now, we sort of have guitars in every closet of the house and in the basement, in the ceiling, and in the garage and every place else. You know, we got more guitars than anything else. Because I refuse now to get rid of any of them, except this one. But I know where this one will be, so if I ever need it, you know, I'm sure I can borrow it back.